master's degrees, one in biological anthropology and one in education from the University of Albany. And the book she's going to speak about, The Knowledge Gap, I did research a bit and is very interesting. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Keenya.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, forgive my voice. I'm getting over a cold. So it's my voice is a little strange, sorry. Let me share my screen. Give me 1 second. Got it. And start here. Okay. And so, I mean, as Fred said, those of you who've heard me before, I teach in Schenectady. And, even before COVID it was challenging, and this year has been especially challenging. But I want to kind of talk about, I'm going to talk about Natalie Wexler's book a lot. But I'm also going to talk about some of the other information. Her book was based on some of the other researchers that have written about this topic. Basically, how I came across this book was, having taught in Schenectady for a few years now, it's a bit, sometimes it's a bit frustrating because, I have students in my class, a lot of them that are not reading at grade level. And of course, that tremendously affects our teaching and what they are able to do and what they are able to learn. And it's like across the board. It's just there's lots of students that are way below reading level. And through my years, I've asked about this, and I know I've heard from colleagues, and my mentor also mentioned this too, that in elementary, they do focus a lot on English language arts, ELA, right? There's an intensive focus, but yet they're still coming to us without really being able to read very well. And it wasn't making much sense. I mean, the usual suspects, there's attendance problem, absolutely. I know that contributes. There's an issue with students being promoted when they're not ready. But I didn't think that explained everything. Because one of the things I noticed a lot was that when they come to me, and I have mostly ninth graders, I also teach 2 classes of repeaters. And that's been the case for a couple of years. Rowan, not now. I'm sorry, Rowan, I can't do anything about it right now. Sorry, my daughter. So basically, I noticed that they just don't know basic information. Like, I have students that come to me, don't know what gas we breathe in from the air, for instance. Like really basic stuff that they should know. And I always thought that was what was affecting them being able to grasp new materials and also being able to understand things that we read or that we discuss. Although sometimes I feel like, the administrator is going to not always getting that idea, or and my thing is, I'm not saying I never said it was a cognitive gap. It wasn't that kids aren't capable. It's just that they just don't know some of the information. And so in my frustration, like reading and looking around, I stumbled upon Natalie's book, and I'm like, this explains so much of what I see. So why is it that the students, even though they're getting all this intense ELA instruction in elementary, why is it some of them are coming to high school without the skills? So that's what I'm going to focus on. And so I'm going to start talking about what is said about the science of reading, and also what goes on, what is being taught in school and at the elementary level. And then I can personally talk about what goes on at the high school level too. So the first part of this is going to be what does science, cognitive science, tell us about how kids actually learn to read and what are the components of reading. So basically in Natalie Wexler's book, what she is doing is she's synthesizing information from cognitive scientists like Daniel Willingham, who I read as a graduate student in my graduate program for education, and Edie Hurst, who is he's an English professor, but he writes a lot about this topic. But she said when she did this, she wanted to kind of write it in a narrative, journalistic way, because what Natalie Wexler is she's a journalist who writes a lot about education, and she got very involved in this issue about 10 years ago, she said, especially trying to figure out what is going on with these achievement gaps. And so she's really synthesizing the work that's known. So I'm going to just kind of briefly talk about what we know about the issue. So, there's two big components in the reading process. There's the decoding ability, basically, knowing what sound go with which letters, words, so phonetic awareness, sound letter knowledge, fluency, that's one thing. Now, that is also still a problem with some of the kids I have at high school level. Like we do get kids that have trouble decoding, but that's not going to be the focus on my talk. And that's also something that's problematic at the elementary level, because although the tide seems to be shifting, where basically science says that the best way to teach decoding is with explicit phonics instruction. But there's been, for various reasons, some resistance to that. But my focus is going to be more on the comprehension side, because the idea is like once the kid learns to code, the grades 1 through 3, or K through 3, learning how to decode, and then after that they read to learn things. But what gets overlooked is for that reading comprehension to take place, you really need prior knowledge. So the whole role that of importance that prior knowledge plays in that reading comprehension, and then I'll say what I mean in a second. Oops, there we go. So like, for example, consider this sentence, right? And this is, I got this example from writing of Edie Hurst, like Joan sacrificed and knocked in a run. When his point is like, it's probable that many Americans, literate Americans, will understand the meaning of this sentence while people in Britain might not. And the whole idea is to really get what the sentence is getting at, you have to understand that it's about baseball. And if you don't have that knowledge, it's not, even if you understand every words of the sentence, you're not going to really get its meaning. And basically, there are assumptions in what writers expect readers to know. So it would be very tedious for a writer to explain every single vocab word to a reader. So there are always going to be things that are left out, and the reader is going to have to make inferences about them. So we sometimes fail to appreciate just how much knowledge, background knowledge, we need to understand a particular passage. And then here's another example. And I want you to look at it for a second. Right, we're all like literate adults, right? Does anybody actually know what this passage is about? Just curious.
Cricket.
Hmm?
It's about cricket.
Yeah, it is. So the thing is, I mean, even like we can understand the words that are written on it. But if you don't know anything about cricket, and I know nothing about cricket, it's really impenetrable to you. It's not going to make a lot of sense. You need the background knowledge to be able to understand this. So somebody with a lot of cricket, so part of the verbiage is being blocked by vid screens. And can everybody see what this is on my screen? I'm just making sure. I was just looking at the chat. Can everybody see this? Yes or no? Yeah, okay. I just want to make sure. Thank you. All right. So the whole point, right, is if you don't know anything about cricket, this is impenetrable. Even if you understand the individual words, you don't get the context because you don't have that background knowledge about it. So again, you're not gonna this is gonna be indecipherable to you. So that background knowledge plays a really important role in what we can comprehend. So one thing to think about, right? Like even if you are to pick up a paper, right, here's New York Times, right, and read a passage. I mean, think about all the underlining things that you need to know to even understand a passage like this. And this is an example that Natalie Wexler has used before in some of her work. But I want everybody to take a minute. What are some of the things that somebody would need to know in order to understand this? We just want everybody to kind of take a look at it, and you can unmute yourself or write in the chat. I can see it. Like I said, this will be interactive. Like think about the things. What are some of the things that you kind of need to understand in order to who Trump is, why he's in trouble? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, about the court system, right? You need to know what an appeal is. You need to know something about the legal system, right? Infrastructure, the role, right? Some legal terminology. And, this is not, and keep in mind, right? This is not written for law students. This is written for a general audience reading a newspaper, right? But these kind of things happen all the time. We as educated adults, we are bringing a lot of background knowledge that we do not appreciate to the table. And sometimes we think, and especially for me in high school, something Natalie has said, we think these kids know more than they do. And there's a lot of stuff that, would probably horrify you. I will tell you more stories later that they do not know. And sometimes it takes me aback because you wonder how it is they got to high school without actually knowing that. But I'll get to that in a bit. But the point is, like, in order to interpret a lot of these passages, right, that background knowledge plays such an important role. All right. Also, knowing more things, right, having more background knowledge, it makes it easier to learn new things. It's referred to as the Matthew effect, after the Gospel of Matthew. Basically, the rich get richer, poor get poorer. Right? The more knowledge you know, knowledge is like Velcro, stick together. Right? The easier it is to learn more things. Right? So the earlier you do it, the better. So because those gaps become greater as time goes on. And a lot of this Matthew effect is due to the limits of working memory. And I'll explain that with a little example in a second. So I want you to look at this list, another activity. And, altogether it's like 18 letters. And I'm going to take this away in about another 10 seconds. And I'm going to ask you to remember think about how many letters you can remember. All right. All right. So how many letters can you guys remember? And I actually did this example with my students too, but I linked it with an episode of Brain Games. Okay. 9. Oh, 9 is pretty good. Right. So what's typical is most people will remember about 5 to 7 letters, and 5 to 7 items, that's the capacity of your working memory. And your working memory is pretty short, it's like 30 seconds. But now I want you to look at this, and same task, but this time, this might be a little easier this time, right? If you're looking at the list. Right, and you probably remember more that second time. That's because what we're doing here, and it's the same letters, it's just reorganized. What this example is doing is something called chunking, where you put an item or a bunch of things in a meaningful together, all in a meaningful way, so that so several items become one. So instead of 3 separate letters, CNN, CNN, if you know the broadcast station network, sorry, that becomes a lot easier to remember, right? So when you chunk items, your brain is literally treating it as fewer items, and that's putting less strain on your working memory. When you know more things, it's so much easier to chunk information. It's much easier to chunk that information into smaller pieces. Also, when you know information too, the other thing is you free up your working memory because you have that information in your long-term memory. And so your working memory is free. Because somebody who doesn't know as much stuff, right? If you don't know a lot of vocab words when you're reading it, right? Your working memory is taking up all that information. And then you're gonna lose track of what you're doing because it's like you gotta keep stopping and starting. Right, so the whole idea is like, knowing more things. You can chunk easily, you have more things in your long-term memory, it makes things easier, it's easier to pick up more and more information. And I mentioned this with my students because I was telling them at the beginning of the year, when we were talking about just how memory works in general, about telling a story, like because I showed them a clip from Brain Games of these champions of memory who memorize whole deck of cards, and basically what they do is they create a story from the deck. So they're really learning how to chunk, doing it well. So the next part that I want to discuss is about how reading comprehension is actually taught in school. And here's an example. It's a lot of emphasis on skills and strategy, which I'll get into in a minute. So one of the interesting things I found with listening to Natalie Wexler and also reading her book was, when she first investigated these problems, she was always told that high school was the problem, right? Because she would, visit high schools and you see kids with their head on the desk like that. I mean, that's happened to me too, or several kids on the test, not as much engagement. And elementary was the bright spot. There's lots of engagement, there was a bit of a bump in some of the tests. And so, that's what the impression she had gotten. But after investigating this issue and also being, put aside by some veteran educators, she realized that, what was deemed as the bright spot was actually where the problem began. And a lot of it has to do with the curriculum, with how ELA, English Language Arts, is taught. So one of the big issues with comprehension is, and I also see this with my daughter's classes too, is that the focus is not on content, it's on comprehension skills. And I'm giving an example of the Common Core standards. Like, so the thing is, a lot of the teachers, they're going to be evaluated eventually on these particular tests at the end of the year. And the tests focus not so much on the content, because the whole idea is not to test students on what they know, but on how well their reading skill is. And if you actually look at these Common Core standards for, especially for English Language Arts, they're really devoid of any content. And I have an example in front of you, it's very vague. Answer questions, find the main idea, and I'll give you some more examples a bit later on. But then part of the reason for that too is because we want to avoid controversy and dictating exactly what needs to be taught to particular elementary classes, like leaving it at vague. But the whole idea of skills-based instruction is really, really problematic for reasons I'm about to get into now. Right, so the texts that they use, right, they're not picked for their content, but they're picked for, how they show off that skill, like maybe interpreting or finding the main idea. They often jump from topic to topic, not sticking to one topic for a very long time. Right, so you might be talking about, whales one week, or not one day, and then clouds. Like, there's no consistency. Right, because again, the focus is more on the skill, and this whole idea that, these skills can be taught like that. And also, right, books they're not separated by topic, but by reading level, by the kids' reading level, right? So there's something called level reading, where kids are given a reader based on their reading level, and the texts are leveled by the complexity of the text, how many complex words or how complex the sentence is. There's like the whole formulas they use for that. But the idea here is that they think by practicing these comprehension skills, practicing finding the main idea, and making inferences, if you practice that and you keep practicing that and you keep practicing that, that you will get better at your comprehension. And that will lead to a higher understanding. But as we saw before, again, there's a lot of problems with this. And I think, honestly, COVID kind of woke up some parents to some of the issues that are going on. I don't know if anybody saw this. So this was apparent when remote learning was happening. I'm just curious, did anybody see about this, heard about this, or saw this? I thought this was amusing. So this guy says, this is from the remote reading lesson I taught my kindergartner yesterday. I am a Pulitzer Prize winning writer, and I couldn't correctly identify the main idea in this passage, though the instructions assured us it was there. Can you find it? And right, so kind of amusing example, right? And the whole idea is finding the main ideas, or, you know, sometimes in writing, there's not, when you read a particular passage, there's not always going to be a main idea. And also finding the main idea, those things are very domain specific. They're not independent. It's not like there's a general skill for it. Yeah, I think the teacher was saying maybe ocean life, or yeah. But again, like you got, I mean, it's pretty problematic. And so more, why is this a problem? And why is this important so cognitive scientists have, you know, been investigating this for quite some time. You know, what's more important? Is it reading skill or is it background knowledge? So this is a very famous study that's been repeated about 1 million times. In 1987, 2 researchers tested 64 7th and 8th graders, and they had been tested for their general reading ability according to standardized tests, and also baseball knowledge based on as scored by, you know, they were given a little baseball test, and they had people who were like the semi-professionals in baseball judge that too. And so what the kids had to do was they were given a passage to read, and then they had a model in front of them, and they basically had to reenact whatever the passage they read was about. And it said the passage was about half an inning, and they had to just reenact the scene. And I want you to take a wild guess at who did better. Was it, so you had, you know, your good readers, but some of them had low baseball knowledge, and then you had poor readers, but with high baseball knowledge. Guess who did better? And as you see here, right, you have low reading. So the kids that had low reading ability but high knowledge, right, actually did better than the kids with high reading ability but with low baseball knowledge. So what really counted and really made the difference here was, again, that background knowledge, knowing the baseball knowledge. So all the kids that had high baseball knowledge did much better than the kids that had little baseball knowledge. And it wasn't about the reading skill. Right? So again, it's all about that background knowledge. And this particular test has been repeated many, many, many times under different contexts. And it's the same idea that, you know, background knowledge is really, really important. Oh, I have a raised hand. Shauna, I'll take the question.
Yep. Hi, Keenya. This has been great so far. Thank you. Just, can you repeat, or I'm sorry if you said it, I missed it, the name of that test?
This particular test?
Yeah.
It's a study in 1987.
Okay, so if I just Google, or it's in the Knowledge Gap book, it's referenced in that?
Yeah,
okay.
Yep.
So 1987 study. And then would you say that that's basically the knowledge, so, you know, the background knowledge that's being referred here would be parallel to what we might refer to as like lived experience, if we're looking at, for example, comparing two candidates for like a job interview, and you had one individual who had a high skill set but no background in a particular lived experience that related to that mission of an organization. Would you say that this study was comparable to that? in
I
terms
mean,
of what that term means, background knowledge.
yeah, okay, that's a fair question. So sometimes it will be a bit of lived experience, but in some cases, like, for the sciences, it's just knowing basic facts too. Or basic
Okay, so just being
information about the
exposed to,
topic. Yeah, basically knowing about the basis of a particular topic.
perfect, thank you.
Okay, if that's clear. And yeah, there's some doodle on there I can't erase, but okay. So again, like I was saying, that a lot of the tests though that are given, right, they try to avoid testing children on content they're being taught, because the whole idea is that it's supposed to be testing your skill set. So this is an example from a standardized test called PARC. It's pretty much a Common Core test that's given to third graders. And so this is also from Wexler's book, 2013. And for us who are educated adults, right, this is pretty straightforward for us. But if I'm to show you a slide of the word that a lot of third graders are unlikely to know, you can see by everything that's plotted out that this is going to be pretty impenetrable to those children, right? And they're not going to be able to understand the passage without knowing that background information. But of course, there are going to be kids that do know this information. And those are going to be kids that are exposed because their parents are highly educated and they get read to more. They go on trips, they go to museums, right? But the problem is that other children who don't have that, they rely on school to learn those kind of basic facts and those informations about topics, but they are not getting that in school. So what has been happening a lot is that, and I don't know if everybody's aware of this, is that subjects in elementary, such as social studies and science, are being cut in favor of more reading instruction. And especially in schools where reading test scores are low, they double down on doing those skills-based instructions, because test scores are low. That means we have to drill more about that. And the irony is that these subjects that they're cutting, like social studies, science, and the arts, would actually help the kids learn more about or do better at these comprehension tests, because it would provide them with the background knowledge they need to understand some of the passages they're giving them. So it's like we're shooting ourselves further in the foot. Right, so I basically said, so that actually, there's an inequity here, because the disadvantaged students get further disadvantaged, because again, they're relying on school for these things, but they're not getting it, they're not going to be getting it from school. Oh, who is unmuted? Right, so that's part of the issue. It's actually not unusual for a kid to be able to get to high school, believe it or not, without having very little social studies or science instruction. That's not that unusual. And when Natalie Wexler started talking about this, I'm like, yeah, because she was saying that she's talked to high school teachers, and she said it's not unusual for some of these kids to come in, not know the difference between a continent and a country. Check, I've seen that. Not know the difference, or not know how to find where they are on a map. Not know the difference between a city, state, country. Yeah, I've seen all of that. Absolutely.
May I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
On the previous screen, it said that you spend a lot of time on reading instructions, and it's shortchanging the students who don't have the background. And the students who do have the background don't need the reading instructions. Who is the reading instruction aimed at?
No, so the students that, I mean, everybody would benefit actually from getting more content put in. But the thing is, like what I was saying is that you'll have students that come from more educated parents that, you know, are able to still do well on the test, not because of what they're actually getting in school, but because of what they're bringing from outside of school. That's the point.
So who's the reading instruction aimed at? Is it, you're just saying it's just misdirected and it's not hitting the students who don't have the background, and the students who are better at reading and comprehension don't need the instruction?
They do. Actually, all students benefit from all students would benefit from getting more content. And I'm gonna get into some of the issues I see at high school too, just to kind of demonstrate. But the thing is that some of the students from wealthier backgrounds that have educated parents, right, they can still end up doing well on these particular tests because of information they're getting outside of school. And so then the thing is, schools are not providing that background information for the kids that rely on just who would need it to get it from just school. And so that's an inequity there. So yeah, and like I was saying, yeah, I mean, I have kids that don't know continents. I had a kid earlier in the year. I forget why we were talking about Australians, but it came up, and so one of the kids thought it was a race, and it was like, and then another kid says, "Wait, Australia, is that a city?" Like there's a lot of, I mean, that's just the tip of the iceberg. There's so much. I have kids that, when we're they don't know how to use a ruler, don't know how to line up the ruler, don't know how decimal places, place values. It goes on. Like really, really, really basic stuff, right? But the thing is, in high school, they're expected to come in with some knowledge, prerequisite knowledge. We assume they have, but they actually don't. And I'll give another example. Like when I was teaching a lab about, just the effect of exercise, right, on keeping your body in what's called homeostasis, keeping all your body systems functioning at normal levels. It's like part of it is kind of understanding, that, we breathe in oxygen. There's a lot of my kids in there, I asked them, what's the gas? They have no idea. They don't even know what a molecule is or an atom. They don't really understand that. I spend a lot of time doing that. It's just, like I said, there are so many, I can go on for days. But again, if the kids don't know as much, right, they're not, it's going to be harder for them because their working memory is taken up with so much new information. It's going to be hard for things to stick. But if you already have that knowledge, especially background knowledge, it's going to be easier for you when you get to high school to absorb more things. Because knowledge is like Velcro. And I have another example that just happened a few weeks ago. So I was teaching a lesson about, well, actually it was a lab about enzymes. And basically the lab was about lactose intolerance. Now, enzymes are a particular protein that we have in our bodies that help us do all kinds of things. But in this case, when we're talking about lactose intolerance, the enzyme called lactase helps us digest that sugar, the lactose sugar in milk. And what I was pointing out is that it's actually unusual for mammals to be able to keep drinking milk way beyond their infant years, that we are unusual for mammals in that respect. and that, you started seeing people doing this when people invented agriculture. But because it's really unusual in mammals, there's actually a large percentage of the population that is lactose intolerant. And so I showed this map. And one of my students, he's one of my best students. So this is a student that, he aces every test I give him. Like, he does great, fantastic. He's looking at the map and he's like, Miss Bemis, I don't know geography. I don't know where anything is. Like, doesn't know continents. And this is a kid that does great in my class. That's what I'm saying. So even the kids that do have background knowledge about some things, it's like there's a disconnect here. And he's not really the only one, right? I have kids that could not identify the continents. If you like, I actually have to go back and actually, go through and teach them that. So just to give you an idea. And I'm like, that was one of my best students too. So what she's saying, I see it too. Absolutely. Like, there is a lot, we assume that high schoolers know way more than they do. And if you actually gave them like just a facts test, just to test them on basic knowledge, they would probably do terribly. And so getting back to Natalie Wexler's examples in her book, so she has this example of 2 different classrooms, so a tale of 2 different classrooms. So in one classroom, and these classrooms are pretty similar, right? As far as social economic status, they're both low income and ethnicity, and mostly students of color, and both have dedicated, well-trained teachers. But the difference is the curriculum they're using. So Ms. Arando's class, they're doing the typical skills-based basal reader, like finding the main idea. And this particular lesson that you're going to see is more about a lesson on picture captions. And then the other class you're going to see is a content-based class, and the lessons on mummies. So the first class, the one that's more skills-based. So, and I'll read the transcript because it's worth reading. What is a caption? Ms. Arando begins brightly to 5 students gathered before her at a semicircular table. As she speaks, she writes caption on a whiteboard next to a chair. No one answers. Ms. Arando writes a second word, label. It's a label, volunteers one girl. What kind of label? The teacher asks. A boy chimes in. It's a label that describes things. What kind of things? Does it tell us the author or the title? It tells us the author and the title, the boy repeats dutifully. No, Ms. Rando says. It tells us about the picture. She shows them a photo from a book called Mothers, which has words daughters, mother, and son imposed in the appropriate spots. So what is a caption? Words. A girl named Nevaeh Bexters. So here's the big kicker, this last paragraph here. As Ms. Arando goes through other books with subsequent small groups, the children pepper her with questions about the pictures, what a shark is eating, or whether a planet is Mars or the moon. She deflects them. The point of the lesson isn't to learn about sharks or planets, it's to learn about captions. So again, right, the whole idea is the skills are in the forefront, right, and the content in the background in this kind of lesson. So here's an example from the other first grade class, but this one is content-based, where content is more important. The poster is from a lesson on Greek mythology, but the excerpt is about a lesson on mummies. They chase you, says one. They don't exist. They walk the line. They walk like they're crazy. They're wrapped in paper. They kidnap you. You all have a lot of ideas about mummies, Ms. Williams says calmly. After taking some questions, are they for real? What do they do? She puts the book into a projector so the kids can follow along. You, the chorus delightedly, they course, lightly as she, as the screen reveals the photograph of a mummy with his hands pressed on the cheek and his teeth fixed in a ghoulish smile. So the children are wrapped as Miss Williams reads about how mummies are dead bodies that have been preserved, sometimes for thousands of years. And the thing that scientists can tell them about that, the ancient man used hair gel, and that another's last meal was vegetable soup. So along the way, here's the important part. She casually points out the text features that in a typical elementary classroom would be the focus of the instruction. So the table of contents. So if I want to make a mummy, what page do I go to? Yes, page 18, how to make a mummy. And a text block that contains a definition of bacteria. You already know about bacteria after studying germs, she reminds them. There's a picture of sarcophagus. We're going to learn about that word. Again, content in the foreground. And she said, basically, with the first class, the skills-based class, they didn't have a lot of class discussion. The kids, kept trying to refer back to the content that the teacher was putting away. Like she said in that excerpt I read, that just to focus on the skill. But in this particular setting where it was more content-based, the kids, she said, even at lunchtime, they're having discussions about what they learned. And these kids are probably going to be retaining that vocabulary. There's a lot of engagement in the class too, much more engagement this way. So, I mean, the kids, the elementary kids, they love the content. But again, it's being sacrificed and more for, teaching the skill of the week. And I mean, I even see it in my second grader, Rowan, and her classwork too. I mean, here's an example that I pulled from one of her activities. And basically, the story is about how they found the largest skull of a bird in Argentina. But if you look at the questions there, it's like focus, what's the main idea? What's, what's the sentence that's opinion that? But it's where it's such a missed opportunity where you can kind of get to the same skill set, but focus it more on the content. Why is this important? What was the discovery that was found? How is that discovery different from things that were found before? Why is this discovery important? Like those kind of questions, where you can kind of get at the same skill set, but make it more content focused instead of, putting the skills in the foreground. And again, it's not the fault of the teacher, it's just the curriculum that we have to work on. And so what can be done? And some of the things that Natalie Wexler said is, you need more content-rich curriculum at the elementary level. And there's a few places that are doing it. One of the places, Core Knowledge, you can find them online at that website. They have something called CKLA, the Core Knowledge Language Arts. All of it's really content-rich ELA, where they are like focusing on particular topics, and they focus on those particular topics for a few weeks before moving on to the next material. But learning, understanding that content is the more important thing. And she said, she didn't want to be all gloom and doomy and thinking that, if they get to high school without it, that there's no hope. What she said at the high school level to do, and which I've been trying to do in my classes, is to use more writing. Use writing as a way of building and retaining knowledge. Because when you write, it forces you to kind of recall information you might have slightly forgotten. You also have to explain it in your own words to someone else. right? All of these things can help you remember the things more, so it goes into your long-term memory. But the important thing is that you do writing instruction based on on the content, and the writing exercises that she goes through. And it's a book called The Writing Revolution, which I have over here. Can be used at any grade level, but the big thing is that they're very content specific, and you can make them harder or easier based on that particular content. And she said, especially if kids, struggle even at the high school level, and I can tell you from personal experience that we have kids that struggle to write even a sentence. A lot of them have trouble spelling basic words. Like, for example, if I see the word does spelled dose again, I can't tell you how many times a kid does that, and multiple kids do it. I have to tell kids how to spell basic words like purple or circle or colors. It's amazing. But so this is a particular activity that's in that Writing Revolution book. It's called the Because But So, and I've done it with my kids too. And basically, it's an exercise teaching kids how to write, just basically starting with sentences. And again, you're doing this just to teach them how to, again, the assumption is some kids are taught writing, but honestly, there's not always that formal writing training. Like I said, a lot of kids still have trouble writing sentences. And also, Natalie Wexler has said that writing is one of the more difficult things that we give students, because it's very taxing on your working memory, especially if you don't know all the steps to writing well, and you have to, if you're a novice writer, you constantly think about what you have to do, and that can take up a lot of your space. So the whole idea is to kind of learn to write sentences from the ground up. But this kind of forces a kid to really think about the content and material and turning it around in a way that so here's an example. Rocks can change shape, and then because wind and water can wear them down, rocks can shape, but it usually takes a very long time. Rocks can change shape, so a cliff that you see today might look different 500 years from now. And I've had some middling success. If we were doing it across the board in all subject areas, it'd probably be more powerful, and that's what is recommended. But you can see, like, the kids, I have kids that really, they just struggle to write anything anyway. But I do find it helpful. But honestly, part of the problem also is just time, because we in high school, at my level, I am a Regents level teacher, and my kids are expected to take a biology Regents exam at the end of the year. And there's a lot of content to cover. And there, when you think about the span of the year, and especially if kids don't have background information, it could take so long to get through. And right now, I am like really terribly behind where I usually am. But even pre-COVID, this was a big issue. So, it's doable, but it's like a lot of high school teachers were constrained by how much content, because the kids have particular tests they need to take. So hard to, yeah, but that is one of the things we can do, but it's just an uphill battle. And the other thing is, what kind of teacher would I be without assigning, further homework? So Natalie Wexler's book is really good, but also these two books too, I would recommend as well. And Daniel Willingham, who's a cognitive scientist, he talks a lot about the science of reading. This book, Why Kids Don't Like School, really, really good. And Edie Hirsch, Why Knowledge Matters. And so they a bit further about the whole knowledge gap issue. All right, and that's pretty much what I have. And so I can start taking questions.
Keenya, thank you very much. It was a great presentation, a lot of interesting information. There were a couple comments in the chat I'd like to go back to if we can, just that came up that did.
Yep.
So Lynn Holland made the comment, for years we have heard it was more important to teach kids how to think rather than to load them up with facts. Sounds like you slash Wexler is turning this on its head.
Right, exactly. And that's part of the issue. And you know, it sounds great. Like we do want to teach them, you know, and this gets emphasized to us as teachers all the time, critical thinking skills. Problem is, again, these kind of skills that we think about and are very domain specific. They're not separate skills. It depends on what you know about a particular thing. It's hard for you to think critically about something that you don't know a lot about. And I was finding that too, like there's a lot of emphasis on what's called inquiry-based learning, where it's like basically you try to get the kids to figure out their own information. And there's a place for it, but with my kids, it's very hard to do that because they just do not have the background knowledge. And I'm like, sometimes I don't feel like I'm listened to. It's hard to do that. If you're a kid, you don't even know you breathe in oxygen. How can you begin to talk about how blood, you know, oxygen being pumped through your blood? I don't know. It's just so, and that's what I liked about hearing what Wexler was saying, is like, we need to teach facts again. You know, facts are not the boogeyman. That's exactly what the kids need. They need that. And that's something Willingham also gets in this book. Why don't students like school? He gets into that more detail. He's like, there's a difference between how a novice approaches something and how an expert does. And basically, you do need that foundation with facts first before you can do the higher level stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And it makes total sense.
Michelle Vicks had a comment. In a nutshell, there's no one size fits all, never was and never will be. Is there anyone who understands that?
Okay, yep.
There were several comments agreeing with a lot of things you were saying. Sue Perry has a comment that that reminds me of what I encountered when I was teaching undergrad psychology. I often felt that I was teaching the basic vocabulary that they should have had.
Yeah, absolutely. I like I said, you know, me and my co-teacher, I teach most of the time with a co-teacher. Sometimes we're like shocked that we shouldn't be at this point. I can't assume the kids know anything, you know, but sometimes it's like really shocking. I'm like, in my head, I'm like, how did you get to high school without knowing that? Like I said, I had a kid struggling with a triple beam balance, which is, you know, used to take measurements of the mass, and I asked basic question about place values, hundreds, tenths, like could not tell me. I'm like, my second grader is doing this. You cannot tell me place values. And it's horrible. Like, I had kids that still cannot round numbers. And we went through it again. They still can't round numbers. They don't understand. If I say round to the nearest tenth, they're looking at me like, what? You know, just like really basic stuff. Don't, you know, when we talk about things specific to biology, don't know, you know, we're talking about the heart and what they have no clue. They don't know what an organ, some of them don't know what an organ is when they come to high school. They have no clue. I just, like I said, I had kids that didn't know what a caterpillar was. Yeah, like I said, I can go on.
Okay.
We
Okay.
really can't assume that they know.
But we know what a
So-
tarantula is.
No, yeah, I'm gonna have kids that don't. And it's like, you know, when I was showing that map of the world, like with lactose intolerance, and I'm like, I forgot about that. Like a lot of kids, they don't know basic geography. I said, even
Okay,
my good students, you know, just, yeah.
We have 3 people that have raised their hands to ask questions. Aya, could you unmute yourself and ask Keenya a question or comment? Got a comment? Aya, you need to unmute yourself. Aya, you're still muted. There we go.
No?
Yes.
Okay, good. Uh, Thank you. It was a very important topic and a good presentation, Keenya. I would just like to point out that there is a big part of this is the methods we use in classroom and with our children, with anybody. And with the methods, part of that is how we relate to a text. If we think of the text as a place where we dig or mine facts, or do we relate to a text by trying to build our own understanding by asking questions and building understanding, and preferably not alone, I'm thinking of a classroom, but together with other students, opening up, like I saw Keenya had a slide where the first one in the left was I wonder, but where the children, all the children can in social interaction, build an understanding, support each other. If one, for instance, a text of Inuits, if one doesn't understand, it's I don't know, it's not good to expose one child with one text. Why not in pairs try to ask questions about text? Somebody, you always know more when there are more people. For instance, in our book group, Dawn, you are not presenting questions for us in a book group that we answer by ourselves, and then you don't provide a test afterwards. A huge joy and growth in our own understanding on all the levels is through conversation. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Yeah, I mean, but yeah, again, though, the issue also is that, you know, even with the text, picking the text, it's what is emphasized. Is it the content or is it the skill set? Like, again, like finding the main idea, what's the inference you can make? What was the author's purpose? Like Wexler in one of her lectures, she said, you know, in some classes you'll see a teacher, you know, read a passage about whales and then ask the students, what was the author's purpose? Instead of like asking about whales.
Mhm.
So it's just the wrong.
Robert Bosca had his hand raised. I'm sorry, Keenya. Robert Bosca, you have something?
Mhm.
Yeah, I read a book a number of years ago called Smarter, Faster, Better. It's by Charles Duhigg. And it's not specifically about education. In the introduction, it says something about him being involved with the science of productivity. Anyway, the last chapter, the last section in the book was about education, and particularly the example he used was a school system, an elementary school. I have the book here. The South Avondale Elementary School in Cincinnati, Ohio. Now they had the lowest scores of any, you know, on the standardized testing of any school, like in the state of Ohio and including, it's like one of the lowest scores in the country, apparently, on the scoring system. And the state poured money in. They lowered the teacher ratio. That didn't seem to have any effect on the scoring. They did a number of things. And then, they set up a website that had each student had a separate page where anyone who had any interaction with the student had to write comments. They had some structure to it, that there was this online thing. And so they set that up to have more, be able to individualize better. So all of this, a lot of money, a lot of time, manpower went into it, no change. And then what they did, they required the teachers, they had to, instead of the information going automatically into the website, they required the teachers to manually put it in. And there was a lot of backlash from teachers about, like making work for them as far as putting it in. But the test scores skyrocketed over the next couple of years, because when teachers were, from doing interviews and stuff, when all this information about the students was on the website, because of other demands on the teachers, like they rearranged time also to allow the teachers to spend more time with putting the information in. But because they had to put it in manually, they were reading it and understanding it more. Whereas before that, it was there, but there was no content, and they allowed for more individualization. The only example that I remember was, like, there was one teacher that discovered that there were several students who were riding on a bus together that were in her class, and there was something, she could give them like books to discuss or things to discuss on the bus that interested them. Anyway, it allowed the teachers to individualize more and to come up with ideas more, and freed up the time for them to do that also, because I know that's a big deal in teaching is, everybody expects you to do everything.
Yeah. So that's why, things like the CKLA, having that content readily available, especially for newer teachers too, that would be most helpful. Like for instance, I've been helping out a teacher who this year she's been thrown into science. She was a FACS teacher, so she, taught, basically, home ec, which is like home ec. And she doesn't really know biology. And so she's like completely overwhelmed. And so I've been trying to help her out with stuff, but it's like we aren't giving a lot of time to prep. A lot of these things I'm talking about, if we had more time to collaborate with each other, that would be lovely, but we don't. And especially now with COVID, I've been covering classes. We don't have enough substitutes. So there's a lot of issues. But I mean, all of these changes that we're talking about have to be systemic changes. But I think the school day needs to be reorganized too. The way we structure some of these things needs to be reorganized to make it work also. There's a lot of, this is just the tip of the iceberg here. But yeah.
Okay. Keenya, Andy had raised his hand, virtual hand, with a comment or question.
The standardized tests like the SAT and IQ tests were criticized because they were geared towards middle-class white people. Now, these students that you say don't seem to have the background, and you're sort of amazed they don't have. Do they have background in other areas that they have knowledge of that perhaps in the books that are being taught, they don't have that knowledge? But if you're a seventh grader, you've had 12, 13 years of life experience. You got to have some background in something. Maybe you're just not emphasizing the right knowledge.
Right, but again, because of what they are expected to know, especially at the upper levels, right? So if they get to me, for instance, I'm like a biology teacher and they don't know much about biology. There are some things that they should know. Like I said, basic, like kind of understanding basic body parts, like have an idea about what organs are and what they do a little bit. They should absolutely know that we breathe oxygen in, have an idea. They should know molecules and atoms. A lot of the kids don't bring that, and it's hard for me to teach my content because there is some underlying expectation that they know these things when we dive deep into the content, because then they're learning it in further detail. And if you don't have that foundation, it's hard to build on that. So, so the thing is, yeah, the kids would have background in those other things of life sorts, but for things that they need academically in school, that's not going to, they need the background in some of these academic areas too. But
can you generalize what background they do have, or is it too wide?
That's too wide. I mean, that's going to vary individually, but it's like, again, as a society, we're going to decide, you know, what we want to teach everyone. You know, there's other nations that do better, that actually have a national curriculum. That's probably never going to happen here. But I mean, it doesn't mean we should absolutely teach like culturally responsive lessons. I mean, we need to be more inclusive. That doesn't exclude that either. But the thing is, it can't be as devoid of content as it is, you know, like having the kids learn their own information. That doesn't work. They need the kids do, especially when they're novices, they need that foundation. They need to learn. There are basic facts and basic general information about topics they need in order to progress to higher levels, especially if they're, you know, going on to other, you know, the subjects like social studies and science, for instance, at higher levels, when it is no way around it.
Thank you, Keenya. Now it's time for the Scrantons. Isaac Scranton made a comment that's, in my experience, if children are engaged with the content, they develop the skills to delve into it much more easily. And then Risa and Laird Scranton have raised their hand and have a question for you.
Okay. You can start either way.
Risa, you need to unmute yourself.
Yes, thank you. Yes, I'm a little slow.
Howdy.
Keenya, thank you. This was fascinating and very, very timely. You showed the example of the bright spot of kids in elementary school with their hands raised and their eyes all wide open, and then the sleeping high schoolers. You left out middle school. It seems to me that middle school is the place for content. That elementary school, yes, focus on the skills, make sure they can read, write, do basic arithmetic, all that. And then in middle school, hopefully they've achieved those skills, maybe picked up a little content in the meantime, but that's where they start to really focus more on content. And then by high school, hopefully they've got both. They've got the skills and the content. You know, I think, as Robert points out, the individualized education, child-centered, that you take each kid into account if you're able to understand what their particular skill set is, what they're lacking, what their background is like, and try to focus on those things. I know it's a lot to ask of any teacher to be able to do that, but there are just so many problems with our educational system, and so many really good, caring teachers like yourself who have the ideas, who know how to fix it. It's just unfathomable to me to see how bad things are in the schools, and to know there are so many good people. And as Robert says, you know, they just throw money at it, but they're not changing anything.
So Risa, the only comment I'll have is those skill sets that you're talking about, they can't be separated from the content. The skills, the very skills that you're talking about, they're very domain specific. That's the whole idea here. You cannot separate it. That's why it needs to start elementary. Yeah, they're supposed to get more content in middle school, yes, but sometimes they're not. So sometimes what happens, especially if you're in a school where reading levels are low, according to the test, those places are going to be doubling down on giving those kids reading instruction to the detriment of other subjects. So some of those kids can still get through even middle school without having formalized lessons.
Yeah, well,
And that does
obviously.
happen. I mean, even, we have a reading teacher in high school, and that's very, that's more unusual. They have to fight to get that, because, I mean, we do have kids that have decoding issues, but like something has to be sacrificed when that happens. Like if you're
Mhm.
doubling down on that, what's going to be sacrificed? A way of fixing that is like have reading instruction embedded in content.
No, agreed,
Put reading
agreed,
instruction
agreed.
with
Yeah.
social studies, with science. Why not do that? Like it should be embedded. Stop thinking them separately. It should be, again, I wish teachers had time to collaborate with each other too. That would be nice. Again, that's another issue. But
Mhm.
and the thing is, we don't always have control of the curriculum, because that's dictated by the standards, the state, and teachers feel obligated to teach to the standards because they get tested on it and they evaluated on it. And again, so I don't blame some elementary school teachers, because it's like the tests are, they're not supposed to be based on content, but on what the skills they need to know, like finding the main ideas. So the teachers don't, think, oh, I gotta emphasize this more, because they're gonna be evaluated on that, frankly. So
Okay.
again.
Okay. Keenya, Jane Lax had a question or / comment. Can you unmute yourself, Jane?
Hi, Keenya, great presentation. Thank you so much for doing this.
Mhm.
So I did professional training, and I know adult learning theory recognizes different learning styles, and relevance, meaning, and then a practical application being paramount. Do those kinds of things still are those in play at elementary, middle school, and high school levels, that something parallel to that?
Well, here's the thing though about like learning styles, and you can read Daniel Willingham on it. But there's a consensus with cognitive scientists, learning styles aren't really a thing, scientifically speaking. But what's important is like, I mean, people might have preferences with this thing, but the kids have distinctive learning styles. But the thing is, it's good to also teach things in different modalities, so that students are exposed to different ways of seeing things that benefits all students.
Yeah. So this
But
isn't really a new thing either, because
no,
if I had listened to the tests, I would, because for some reason I never scored well on reading comprehension. Never.
Hmm.
And I was reading at a 7th or 8th grade level, like when I was in 1st grade. Reading, very knowledgeable. But for some reason, I could not do well on a reading comprehension test. And, at the time, they would have these little these little descriptions that said, this student probably won't do well in school, and really needs to focus on like more of the technical skills, etc. I write for a living right now. I mean, and my livelihood depends on this. So for me, it was very frustrating. I mean, I actually went to high school thinking I couldn't write because of this kind of feedback. And I think it's insane if someone like me ends up thinking I can't read and write.
Yeah.
Where clearly I could.
Right.
That there's a misalignment here in what they're looking for. Like the little ocean cartoon you gave, it was like, I probably would have said, something out of the box, and it wouldn't have been recognized because it wasn't the prescribed thing.
Right. And the whole idea is ridiculous. I mean, like I said, some parents there was an example of some parents being woken up to, oh, this is what's going on in some of these elementary classes. But what was I going to say? Again, yeah, it's just it's really crazy. And what these reading tests are actually tests of, and they're not supposed to be that they're tests of what your knowledge, your general knowledge. There's no such thing as a reading level per se. If you're really understanding what Wexler and Willingham are saying, and you're saying that, this whole idea of grade level reading level is like not really a thing. It's what the reading tests are actually, they're testing knowledge. You're testing general knowledge is what you're really testing, even though that's not what they think they're testing, but that is what you're testing.
Well, I had high knowledge and very bad comprehension, apparently.
No, but it depends on what you're being asked about. If it's passage, if you're being tested on passages for things that you don't know about, you're not going to do well. But
relevance has to have.
Yeah.
Relevance and relatability. How, someone else was asking questions about this earlier.
So
it has to have an impact.
And we have, we're approaching
Okay.
3 o'clock and we still have 5 people that have their hands raised. And I'd like, all this conversation is interesting, but I want to respect Kenya's time as well as get to many questions as we can. So Kenya, are you okay to do 5 more questions?
Oh yeah. Yeah, I'm fine. I'm not in a rush.
Okay. Al, I'm gonna butcher your last name, so I'm just gonna call you Al.
Okay, Al Canestraro. But that's a great presentation. I live in a school district that generally is considered to have a good reputation. It's a carefully curated reputation, I would say. But could I safely assume that the picture that you paint for the school district where you work applies probably in my school district as well? I mean, is it?
That
Can we
is.
assume that all the school districts are like that?
Yeah, they probably are. Even some of the wealthier districts, some of the they a lot. You'll see a lot of skills based. You can tell by looking at, like, if you have a kid in school, looking at some of the materials they're coming home with, like I was showing my daughter. But yeah, I mean, that's pretty, the skills based stuff, that's pretty standard. It's pretty typical. That's more typical than, there are a few schools doing the content based lessons, but it's more typical is the skills based comprehension.
Okay. Aya, you had another question or comment?
Yes, I think it was so, I applaud your work really, and your way of trying to find out even more. But I'm thinking of the content, that it's what I know, that it's not only a content, but it's so important for, and this is my question to you, to teach and engage students in literate thinking, for instance, in building interpretive thinking. Envisionments of a fictional text is different from scientific thinking. That how do you take that into account? And if I may just show a book. You see this? I can write this. This is by me and my fellow author Mary Adler, from a research project in schools by Scholastic a couple of years ago. But Judith Langer is an Albany professor, now emeritus, who has written a lot about critical thinking and literate thinking in classrooms. So how does that come to play, the scientific thinking, that how do you, your example was a little bit.
Just to get it, I mean, it's basically, I'm right with you. Again, domain specific. So that's why when you teach those critical thinking skills, it has to be domain specific. When you teach about writing, right, how the way you would think about fiction would be different from what we would do in science. Again, you're learning it in that specific domain. So, I mean, it doesn't, I'm not disagreeing with what you're saying. It's just that to keep in mind that, the way we treat it now, we think of critical thinking like it's this one entity that's independent of the domain you're trying to teach in, and it's not. It's very domain specific. So you need to teach those kind of skills in that particular domain. So if you're teaching about fiction, you're gonna do it in that context. You feel like you getting what I'm saying? So, right, Wexler and Willingham, they're not gonna disagree with you. They're saying, but you're actually making their point that it's going to be domain specific. Like what you do in one area, in one domain, how you think about the problem is going to be different from how you think about it in another domain. And that's why the kids need to have that background knowledge in those specific domains. That's exactly why they need it.
Mhm.
They need a background knowledge about how fiction works, the elements of fiction, what makes fiction, they need to understand that.
Okay. Thank you, Keenya. Fred had a comment / question. Fred, can you
Hi, Keenya.
ready?
I just had a couple comments. I think something that you pointed out quickly is kind of important. You showed a set of books and you said they were organized by reading level rather than by subject. And I think that it doesn't allow kids to go and delve into any one subject continuously, to repeat it. I saw my own kids, my daughter in third grade has having trouble with multiplication. And I asked her, where's your multiplication table? She didn't know what that was. They were teaching like one day a little bit of multiplication, another day a little division. They were jumping around. And I showed her a multiplication table. I sat down with her, explained multiplication in depth, and then she got it. But they were constantly jumping around. And I remember my son in high school, at open school night, his math teacher was an older man who immediately, the first thing he said was, I'm apologizing for the curriculum. It's not like it used to be where we taught one subject in depth, like trigonometry or geometry. They were forced to jump around, and it just makes it difficult. I've read a couple books recently on neuroscience and brain development, and they point out exactly what you said about working memory being overloaded. Things don't get into long-term memory until working memory has a chance to digest in depth. If the attention is constantly being drawn somewhere else, they could read. I was helping disadvantaged kids, tutoring elementary school kids just before the pandemic. I remember a fourth grade girl, she had a little article about volcanoes in Hawaii. She was fascinated by it, but then it was exactly as you pointed out, what's the main idea? What's this? And she hit a stone wall. And she totally lost interest in the topic and didn't retain any of the content. And it just makes it very difficult for them to progress. And it's putting all these facts in long-term memory that your brain has a chance to collate them and put them in logical sequences and knit them together. And if they don't get a chance to do that, they're never going to progress.
Right. Thank you for that. Yeah, that's the problem I'm having too. And then what the thing is, suddenly when they go to high school, I mean, you get a little bit of that in middle school, but when they're in high school, they're definitely going to be content focused and lost. I'm like, this is why I'm falling behind. I have to fill in so much background information. It's not funny. And I can't get through all the content I need to get to for the Regents exam. So I'm hoping the state, cancels it like they did in January, because there's no way they're going to be ready. But it's like, it takes us forever to get through it, because it's like, I have to go back and fill in information that they should have had, but they don't know, because otherwise we get nowhere, And again, their short-term memory, but their working memory is taxed because they don't know the information is not in their long-term. And I mean, I talk to the kids. I'm like, I want you to practice. And then some of them are resistant to practicing because they've been through school and they're not working, and then they get discouraged. But it's like, and I emphasize to the kids, you need to practice so that it gets into your long-term memory. And it's kind of hard when they get in high school to get them to buy in. It's like, sometimes it's pulling teeth. It really is. And we all, like, I'm next to the math teacher. We all talk to each other. We all kind of trying to figure out what we can do. But it's like I said, it has to be a systematic change, because it's like by the time they get to us in high school, it's hard. It's so much harder.
Okay. So thank you, Keenya and Fred. Rob Smith had a question / comment. Rob, can you unmute yourself?
Yeah, I'm looking at the materials presented, and it seems to me that the questions are irrelevant. That is, what is the main topic of this paragraph, or what is the main idea? That's not important. What is important is what it is. The content is supposed to be important, but
yes.
the abstract idea, can you abstract from that what the main idea is? And then they give you a bunch of multiple choice, all of which are wrong. Jane Lax pointed out that the fish one was a problem. It was, because the paragraph talks about octopuses. There are no octopuses in that picture. Talks about sharks. I couldn't find a shark in there. I mean, I didn't have enough time to really identify on my small screen, but it looked, I mean, these are not relevant. And you should be able to, in looking at the material presented, look at the visuals with it and get some idea of the content. And that's not happening. And I see that over and over in different examples. And I really question how important it is to ask students again and again to abstract from a paragraph a main idea. Often writers, in fact, do not have a clear main idea, and often those paragraphs that they present are incorrect. They have multiple ideas in them. You'll find the paragraph about the bird skull in Argentina. I don't know if you're talking about Argentina or I don't know what you're talking about.
That was my daughter's lesson. Yeah, that was an example. That was a personal example from like the lesson her teacher gave her, right? And it's, you know, you could tell it's a part of like whatever basal reader or whatever they gave. And it's like, yeah, what's the main idea? Sometimes it's like irrelevant. It should be content, exactly. But the whole idea is that, you know, there's this idea in education that we think that this main idea, like you double down and teach them, like, because it's a separate skill. But the thing that's not understood is those kind of skill sets, being able to make inferences, those are all domain specific. They're not separate skills. That's the part that it's not getting understood. And so I think your comment, Rob, because yeah, that's a big issue.
So,
a lot, it's like, you know, I'm looking at that like, who cares? What's the main idea? It's like, why is this important? Why is what they're saying important? That's what be the focus. Anyway, yeah.
So David Napples had raised his hand. David?
Yes, thank you. Great talk today. I was very much attracted to this talk today because this is an area of my own research, and I've read a lot of E.D. Hirsch. And I've also got the Williams book too. Absolutely great. I loved it. I didn't want to ask you, you know, E.D. Hirsch has gotten a lot of criticism over the years. And one of the things that he's identified as part of the big problem is politics. Surprise, surprise. But he's, you know, part of the issue is, and he's brought this up in his books, is anytime you start saying, I think facts X, Y, and Z are important, people immediately politicize it. Well, why are you teaching X, Y, and Z and not A, B, and C? You're like, why are you teaching geography of this part of the world and not geography of that part of the world? And then, you know, in his book here, Cultural Literacy, you know, he lists like 5,000, he just gives terms. I think everyone should know these 5,000 terms. He was heavily criticized for saying that, you know, these are important terms. And it kind of had this elitist attitude. And his attitude has always been, well, if I'm an elitist, then call me an elitist. I don't care. I think it's important to learn facts. But almost the way you're describing, I mean, he's heavily focused on cultural politics as part of this. But from what I'm hearing from you, it's even deeper than that, that this has gotten down to the point where even basic biological functions, even, you know, some of the most basic facts seem to be completely lacking from students now. So it seems to be, am I hearing you correctly that this is really goes even farther than that problem?
Yeah, because again, you know, the kids, especially, you know, we have more lower income kids. Our kids are going to be more reliant on school to learn those facts about how, you know, topics like how your body works and all that. And they're not getting it because the ELA focus is on skills, finding the main idea, making inferences. So that, you know, and I said, science and social studies are getting cut down. And then when the test scores are really low, they get cut down even more. So they, you know, the kids can go through without getting any formal information. So that means by the time they get to us, they don't really understand how their body works. They don't know anything. Like I said, I can't tell you, you know, I asked, you know, what's the gas that we breathe in from the air? Kids can't answer that. You
Period.
know, it's scary. There are things that are scary. Yeah, I had kids who could not use a ruler, didn't know how to use it. I'm serious. Like basic, knowing really basic information. We assume by the time they get in high school, they know certain things. No, they don't. I found over my experience, I can't assume they know anything. So I have to ask and I have to probe to see what exactly they know before I proceed. This is how I have to start instruction. And then sometimes when we're going through, I see that there's another gap that they have and I have to go back, fill. So yeah, this is an issue. Because again, they should be getting that content early, but they're not. And so by the time they get to me, well, they don't know anything.
So, yeah, that's unfortunate, Keenya, but this is a very interesting presentation today. Sue Perry had a question in the chat I want to read to you because it kind of sums up a lot of kind of state of play. She asked, are these ideas catching on at all? And I assume that those, some of the things the writer of the book was talking about, suggestions.
Not as much as it should. I mean, there's some places that know about it. There's, you know, E.D. Hirsch has been around for a while. But, you know, and like David said, yeah, he's criticized for some of the things. And I mean, there's always going to be that issue about what you should focus on. And E.D. Hirsch is not, you know, he was giving examples, but he was like, you know, we as a society still have to decide on what, you know, we think is important. But the thing is, I think kids need to know enough to be able to read a magazine or read a newspaper. They need to have that kind of knowledge and the facts that go with it. They need to know at least that much, I would say, like to be able to, but yeah.
Well, again, thank you, Keenya. You know, we do appreciate you taking time this afternoon for the presentation and to answer all the conversation. I know it engendered a lot of good conversation and questions, and we do appreciate your time.